So I'm going to give you a quick, you could say fast introduction to FastAPI. This is not designed to be super in-depth. This is just, you've probably heard of FastAPI and you're wondering, well, what is it? How does it work? How can I get into it? And so I'm hoping to give you in the next, 20 some odd minutes, that quick introduction to give you the handhold so you can then take it to the next level. And as I Oops, I'm just here. As I just mentioned, right, I teach Python and Pandas for a living. I do corporate training. I have my own site, lernerpython.com. I have a bunch of newsletters. My Better Developers newsletter talks about Python. My Bamboo Weekly newsletter is every Wednesday. I come up with new questions based on topics in current events in the news using a real life data set. And the idea is just practice, practice, practice. I have a YouTube channel where I talk about Python and Pandas. And here are my books, Python Workout and Pandas Workout, both published by Manning. So let's talk a little bit about APIs, right? So APIs have been around for a very long time. Back when I graduated from university, we talked about APIs, but the idea then was not what we think about it as now. The idea was, I want to access some functionality that someone else has produced. How can I do that without compiling my code into theirs? And the idea was, well, an application program interface. This is not to be confused with an ABI, an application binary interface, where you actually do sort of compile in. And so an operating system is a great example of this. If I want to use facilities in my OS, I call functions that are in an API. And that's why, of course, when operating systems are upgraded, so many things break because people ignored the API specifications. And so good documentation is crucial. What argument or arguments does a function expect to get? What does that function return? And what happens if something goes wrong? Well, we're now in, you might have heard, the internet age, when computers are spread out all over, and we then want to use what are known as remote APIs. And the idea is we can actually treat the internet as a collection of APIs. Each URL is a function, and we can send the arguments in our query to that URL, and we can get the results back in machine-readable format, typically, not always, but typically in JSON. And this is huge then. It means that your website is not primarily designed for people, but for computers. Right now, you might have a website that's meant for people that they can go and browse and look and enjoy your images and all that stuff. But you can have a website that is not meant for people to look at all. It's just for other applications to talk to. And this would mean then that mobile apps can get updates from a server. It means the mobile apps can send updates to a server. And it means that different parts of an application, a larger app, can communicate with one another. This is a really, really big deal. And modern remote APIs use then HTTP for communication, right? The function we call that a URL. The arguments we pass can be passed in a few different ways. A common one is as query parameters in the URL. And another way would be in the body of the message, typically as JSON, right? JavaScript object notation. You're probably familiar with that. And the return values in the response, also normally JSON. And so HTTP gives us a lot of other advantages. One that I did not write here is it has a whole set, well, I guess I did down below. It has error codes that we can use if things go wrong. But it also has metadata that I can send request and response headers that will give hints to the function when it gets my call. And it has cookies, so we have session information. I can know, has someone logged in before? Are they authorized? And so on and so forth. Now, the thing is, you can serve APIs with any old system. And if you're in the Python world, and I think it's safe to assume you are, folks, then you can use Django and Flask, and you can do that just fine. So you don't need anything special for serving APIs. You don't even need the add-ons for Django and Flask that do APIs. But it's just one of the things that those systems do. And you're probably going to want something that's like specialized and really it's like fine-tuned for that. And that is where FastAPI comes in. FastAPI has been around for about 5 years. It is extraordinarily, extraordinarily popular, and it's all about serving APIs with JSON. That's it. Can it do other things? Yes, but this is its like primary thing. Anything else is, a side bonus. It's fast to set up, and it runs really fast as well. So really, like the fast refers to you and your time, and also the execution time. So what I want to do is show you how we can pretty quickly install FastAPI and understand some of the basic ideas and like get a little application up and running. I'm not going to do a live demo here. I'm too scared of doing that when I give a conference talk, but believe me, I've made this work. So you install it with pip, and notice you don't want to just install FastAPI. You want to install FastAPI standard. That includes the whole bunch of different dependencies that you're going to need to get it to work. Okay, now I've installed this package. Now what? Well, here is your first API, FastAPI program. First thing we have to do, and we're going to talk about this more in a little bit, is, you know what? We'll talk about it. I know that I'm going to talk about it. So let's just run it. And we run it by saying FastAPI dev main.py. Now, main.py is the file in which I put my app, and FastAPI is the command to run it. And dev means let's do it in development mode. That's going to give me a ton of debugging information. It means that every time someone makes a request, we're going to see the request come in, whether there's an error or whether it works correctly. It's really going to produce a lot of logging information, but that's okay. We're in dev mode. It also says what URL should you use to view the app. It's like, oh, you're in dev mode. You probably want to try it. Here you go. And it also automatically reloads our app. So if I'm looking at main.py and then I go and edit main.py, it will automatically check and see, hey, main.py has changed. Let's reload it and rerun the server. That's not to be trifled at. And if you want to run in production mode, then you just say FastAPI run or FastAPI main.py. You don't say dev. That's the big deal. And the output from this, from what I just showed you, and I'm going to go over it in a moment, is JSON. And the JSON has a key and a value. The key is going to be message, and the value is going to be hello. So this is my basic hello world in FastAPI. Success. That was pretty fast. That was pretty great. But you know what? That was very nice, except how did it work? What did we actually do? Let's pick apart what we actually did here. So the first thing we have to do is say from FastAPI, import FastAPI, right? This is a pretty standard Python thing to do. And basically we're saying, go to the package, FastAPI, module package, although I'm guessing it's a package, go then find, and it's a class in this particular case, the FastAPI class. We can tell that both because in the next line, we're going to be creating an instance of it, and because I know, and because as a convention of naming, if it's a camel case, if it starts with a capital letter and the rest is lowercase, that means it's a class. So all we're doing is we're loading up a class that we're going to want to create an instance of. Then I'm going to say here, app equals FastAPI. I'm going to create an instance of the application, and this is going to be it's going to provide us with the decorators. It's going to provide us with all of the stuff that we need in order for it all to work. And then we get to the real meat of it. Now, the thing is, I mentioned before that an API is a function call, right? So I've got this function sitting on a server somewhere. Someone wants to make a request to that server. How do we connect that HTTP request to the function? And the answer in the case of FastAPI and also several other web applications is we use a decorator. And the decorator, I've got lots of other talks about decorators, but this decorator app.get means I want to make this function available via FastAPI to the outside world using the HTTP GET request method. So if someone does get / in this particular case, that would be the root of the index of my website, then basically they're going to be able to run this function. And what does this function do? Well, this function says hello, but it's not a regular function. It's an async function. It's going to use async IO. Now, you don't have to say async def, but it's pretty common to do that because you get a lot of speed advantages. If you define your function as async def, then FastAPI knows what to do, and it'll queue it up on the event loop, and then it will run, and it will run sort of not in parallel with, but alongside all of the other async defs that you have. And then finally, we have the actual function body, which doesn't do very much here. All it says is return message hello. We're going to return this JSON. Wait, this is a JSON. This is a dictionary. Right. People often make this mistake because JSON looks like a dictionary, but we are going to return a string in JSON that was initialized through this dictionary. So far, so good. But you know what? This is super boring. I mean, if we're not going to do any sort of IPO based on having a hello world sort of function on /, we want something a little more interesting. And the more interesting has to come from some inputs. I mean, it's not really enough for someone to just call our website, come to our website and not provide inputs. If we give the same output to everyone, boring. So one way that we can pass an argument is in the URL itself, that after the function name, if we can have a / and then what's known as the path parameter. So if our URL is /hello, then I can say /hello /Reuven. And then everything after that / is considered to be what we call a path parameter. So how do we do this? Well, we have to do two things. First of all, we have to tell our function that it's going to get an argument. And we do that by defining a parameter in the function. The second thing we need to do is you tell our decorator to expect a value in that parameter. So let me show you what that's going to look like. Here we're going to say app.get, just like before. I've changed it from slash to slash hello, but no great shakes. Slash hello slash, and look, we use curly braces, sort of kind of like in an F string. And then based on that, I can have my function. My function has a parameter name. Those names need to match up. The decorator is going to grab something. It's going to look for a pattern there. It's going to grab something in name, and it's going to pass it along to the name parameter in your hello function. And then we can use it just like any other value, right? We use a regular parameter, regular variable in our function. So that's great. But you know what? They're a little weird. Let's face it, path parameters, they work, but what we really want is something a little more flexible, like multiple names, multiple values. So how can we do that? Well, query parameters are pretty darn common, right? And that comes in this form, where after the function name, as part of the URL, we have a question mark. And after the question mark, we say name equals value, name equals value, name equals value, as many names and as many values as you want, more or less. And so what we have here in this example is we have a path parameter, but then we also have a query parameter, name one, and we also have a query parameter, name two. We actually have the whole, all of them together. And you can use one or the other or both if you really want to. So how can I take advantage of this in FastAPI? How can I get these sorts of query parameters? And actually, it's even simpler than what we did before. Query parameters are named in the function, but not in the decorator. And they're regular function parameters, so we can give them default values also. This means that if someone calls our API from remotely and they don't provide that parameter value, that's okay. We've got a default value. We can even make it optional by giving a default argument value of none. Fancy. So let's see a little function here. I'm going to create a calculator API because calculators are very expensive and difficult to come by, and we really need to use a web API in order to do some calculations. So let's take a look. App-get /calc/operator. So this means we are going to get a query parameter. We're going to get a path parameter, and that's going to be the operator we want, plus or times in this particular case. And then my function takes 3 arguments and 3 parameters, operator, x, and y. Operator is going to be for the path. X and y are going to be query parameters. And then we can do whatever we want with them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the operator, x and y, and the result. And we can see from the function definition that if we get plus in the path, we will add them together. If we star in the path, we're going to multiply them together. And otherwise, we'll say result is unknown. Fantastic. Let's run this thing. So we're going to call it with plus and 10 and 20. And 10 plus 20, as we all know, is 1020, and all is good. Wait, I think something went wrong here. Uh-oh. The problem is that query parameters, all parameters when it comes to the web, are strings. And your function needs to know how to turn them from strings into something else. And in FastAPI, the way you do that is with a type annotation. If you add a type annotation, then the type is forced. How am I going to do that? Well, if you're new to type hints and type annotations, it's actually not that complex. All we have to do is put this here, x:float, y:float. Now, by the way, you might be saying, wait, what if I want to pass integers? Yeah, float includes integers. Although if you really want to, you can say int vertical bar float, int vertical bar float. You don't need to. You don't need to because all ints are compatible with floats. We should be fine there. So now that I've done that, just that with the type hints, suddenly when I call my API now, it'll work. Now I call it with exactly the same URL as before. Oh, if I call the URL as before, it'll be fine. But it's even better because now if I call it with x is 10 and y is ABCD, it will say, hey, I tried to turn this into an integer and I was unable to do that. And look at that message. Input should be a valid number, unable to parse string as a number. And it tells you it was ABCD. It tells you in the Y query. Amazing. It even tells you it was a float parsing sort of error. FastAPI is really smart about giving us smart and good errors so that we'll be able to debug our programs and understand what's going on, right? And this is a real leg up. And it has all sorts of smart little things in there that we can use in a variety of ways. For example, let's say we have Boolean arguments, right? So if you give a type hint of bool, right, which is true or false in Python, and Python is very strict. It's true with a capital T or false with a capital F. But if you give a type hint of bool, then FastAPI will accept a whole lot of different values. True and false, which are capitalized, like in Python. True and false, which are lowercase, like in some other languages, inferior languages. You can pass 1 and 0. You can even pass on and off. And all of these are turned into true and false values. Pretty snazzy. Okay, what comes next? Well, so far we've been using the get request method, and it works, but all the inputs are passed in the URL. The post request method sends it outside of the URL. They're still name value pairs, but it means that we can pass things that are a little meatier and longer and not mess up our URL quite so much. Now, in order to catch such requests in FastAPI, we need to use app.post. But, this is not enough. Oh, I see here that I got spell checked. It's not pedantic model, it's pydantic model. Basically, oh, I see it spell checked everywhere. So pydantic is a system that describes the types that we want. And if we want, and it's used in classes. So if I'm building a Python class, I can say, hey, any instance of my class needs to have these values in these attributes. Otherwise, it's not considered valid. So this is used by FastAPI. If I want to receive a post request, I need to specify the fields using a Python class. Now, you're not going to use this class. You're not going to instantiate this class directly. But FastAPI will use the class in order to understand what attributes it should get and what types that should get. And this provides us with runtime type checking. And it can, if you really want, get pretty complex. So here's a simple example. I'm going to say this is my model class. So from Pydantic, import base model. And then I say my person class has first name, last name, and shoe size. And the first two are strings, and the third is an int. Okay? And these type hints will force the conversion, much as we did with the type hints before. But wait, how am I going to integrate my class person into my request? Well, all I have to do is say app.post/greetperson. This is a new URL, async def of greetperson. And look at this. It accepts one argument, person, and we've typed into that with person, the class. In other words, this is going to be a query parameter that we get, not a path parameter. And we saw before, then we don't have to mention it in the decorator on top. But when we do this, it means, hey, I expect to get my data in the form of a person class, which means then I can say person.firstname, person.last name, person.shoe size. I reference the model, I use the model's fields, and it works great. If I now say, for example, I'm going to use curl here to do a post, and I send first name is Reuven, last name is Lerner, shoe size is 46, I get back JSON. The message is, hello, Reuven Lerner, and it also returns shoe size 46, even says the URL origin because that's what I asked for. Amazing. That's exactly what I wanted. And the thing is, if I pass it values that will not work, for example, if I pass it a non-integer as shoe size or a string that cannot be turned to an integer shoe size, I'll get an error just like we saw before. Fantastic. But this is kind of simple, right? Like I want better validation than this. And we can do that. What if I want to say, look, someone's name needs to be a certain minimum, certain maximum. Maybe values like shoe size. We don't want shoe size to be too small or too big. For this, we can use Pydantic's field specifier. And what we do then is we say, I am willing to accept this and this and this. And if I get a bad value, the caller will get an error message. Let's take a look at how that looks. So this is once again from Pydantic import base model. Now I'm going to sort of jazz up my person class. So class person base inherits from base model once again. But now look what I've done. First name colon start equals. And now what we're doing is we're saying first name is not just declared to be a string. First name is going to be an instance of field, which we got from Pydantic. And that field instance was told it has to have a minimum length of 1 and a maximum length of 15. Same thing for last name. You want to have a one letter last name or first name, that's okay. But you want to have one that's longer than 15 letters, we're not going to allow you on our system. I apologize to people with very long last names. And shoe size, we can say it has to be greater than 1 and less than 56. And these type hints will force the conversion and they'll do some type checking. So if I now call this URL and I say, okay, greet person, but I'm going to pass, look at this on top, where I'm going to say first name is an empty string, last name is an empty string, and shoe size is 1. This is for a person with no name and with very, very, very small feet. So we get back errors in the JSON. It says the string is too short for first name. It should have at least 1 character. I didn't have to write this error message. Pydantic did it for me. Same thing for the last name. And for the shoe size, it says input should be greater than 1. Phenomenal. Error handling. So we see now, I don't have anything more on this slide. Oops. Error handling is taken care of in beautiful, beautiful ways then. And we get it back in JSON, which means we can document it in our API documentation, tell people what they're going to get. Speaking of which, FastAPI creates automated documentation. If you go to /docs, and I should add, when you run your application in dev mode, it not only gives you the URL for your app, it gives you the URL for your app's documentation. If you go to /docs, you'll get full documentation for your FastAPI app. You don't need to write the docs. And here's what it looks like. I went here to my little local operation, and we see now the 3 URLs that I defined. We see now we have /hello that takes name. We have /calc that takes operator. And we have /greet person, which, notice, hello and calc are both get, and greet person is post. Okay, and so it identifies them. Now, this is going to be really small. I apologize for this, but I decided to expand the /calc one with get. And look at this. It opens up, it not only documents it, telling me they're required, what values do they expect to get. I can even, it gives me a little HTML form and a button that I can try it out right there. Pretty snazzy. And it shows me down at the bottom successful responses, what validation is, what responses have we gotten already, and what will they look like. I can really, really play around with this right from this sort of like debugging command console. Pretty snazzy. Now, there is a lot more that we can get to here in FastAPI, but the FastAPI website, which is fastapi.tiangolo.com, it has documentation, it has tutorials, it has examples, and most importantly, it shows you how to deploy FastAPI apps in a variety of ways. Do you want to do it on your own server? Do you want to do it on a cloud server, right? Do you want to, no matter how you want to deploy, you will not want to use the standard basic development HTTP server that FastAPI comes with. You are 100% going to want to deploy it with something more serious, and they walk you through how to do it. It is no surprise. I hope this showed you, right, like what was going on here, but it's no surprise that FastAPI has really grown by leaps and bounds. The number of people by corporate training who come to learn Python because they want to either serve up APIs or consume APIs is just growing over time. And there we go. I have about 2 minutes for questions before I have to return to class. I'm very sorry. You can, however, you're free to contact me if you have questions or comments via email. Check me out at learningpython.com. I'm on Blue Sky, like all the cool kids now, at learningpython.com. And I have YouTube, and I would love to hear from you folks. And I appreciate you paying attention and coming to my talk. Thanks so much, and thanks so much for inviting me.